Have you ever heard a musical artist described as having great chops? What does that mean? Well, the term chops is slang in the music business that refers to an artist that has developed great skills over time, whether they are a musician, composer, producer, or other titles associated with the music business. This is Scott Grimaldi, your host of Got Chops. Join me as I interview one musical artist per episode that I've had the pleasure of either performing, recording, or work with in my career. Plus, I'll be interviewing artists I've always wanted to speak with. We'll discover how each artist developed their chops, listen to their stories, and much more. This is Got Chops. Today's special guest artist is an international fingerstyle guitar champion and virtuoso whose performances have enthralled audiences from Stockholm to the Threadbow Jazz Festival in Australia. His fingerstyle guitar weaves a rich tapestry of beautiful melody, dynamic rhythm, and creative improvisation. Fusing influences from South America and around the world, this guitarist creates an entrancing travelogue as an instrumentalist, bandleader, singer-songwriter, and educator. He has been featured on tours and recordings with Indian violin virtuoso Dr. L. Subramaniam, alongside Larry Coryell and Herbie Hancock, and has played opposite the legendary Taj Mahal and Les Paul, among other greats. He is a repeat featured performer and judge at the Indiana State Fingerstyle Guitar Competition, as well as a main stage performer at the Walnut Valley Festival in Wichita, Kansas, where he won first place in the 2009 International Fingerstyle Guitar Competition. I have witnessed the brilliance of this multi-talented musician for many years as we perform together on various types of music gigs. He has the uncanny ability of going from an acoustic fingerstyle picking to playing monster solos on the electric guitar. When it came time for me to select the musicians for my studio album, The Color of Midnight, this gentleman was the first one that came to mind when selecting a guitarist that could do it all, and he delivered. Please welcome my special guest artist and friend, Mark Sganga. Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Morning, Scott. I'm doing great. Nice to hear from you. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for doing this interview. I really appreciate it. It gives me a chance to share with my listeners who you are, what you're all about, the things that I know and all your friends and family know. And it would be great to share the stories that you have to tell today about how you achieved your chops and the stories that led up to where you are today. And just to fill my listeners in, Mark and I have been friends for many years, and we have worked on many types of music gigs throughout the years. A couple of words come to mind when I think of Mark Sganga. When you look at Mark play, whether it's on his YouTube channel or playing in person, he exudes such passion. You could see it in every note that he plays. And he is just totally focused. I mean, every great musician is, but he is just so into what he's doing every second of the way. So it's a pleasure for me to have you on the show today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
So let me ask you, when you hear the music slang "got chops," what does that mean to you?
Well, that's a interesting question there. So we can take that as meaning that someone has a great technical ability, right? Their chops, but it's one of those phrases that I think has developed more than that, and now we take it to mean that someone's an accomplished player, for lack of a better way to say that. I mean, think about it. The original phrase comes from the idea of your chops, literally your lips and your mouth, and that's the way we described horn players, right?
Exactly.
And now we apply it to musicians of all stripes. And I think it's come to mean a lot more than just that person has technique, but rather that, they're bringing something musical to the table.
I agree. So let me ask you, did you grow up in a musical household, and where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, till I was about 10. That's when we moved to New Jersey, and I've lived in northern New Jersey ever since then. Was it a musical household? Not directly, but there were some very musical things about it. I grew up in an extended family with my grandparents while we lived in Brooklyn, and my grandfather had joined a community band when he was a young man and had first immigrated to America, just as something to do. They taught him to play the clarinet, and it was a social thing for him on Sundays to play in this community band. He later joined the Army because that was a path to citizenship, and he served in World War I. So he constantly reminded me, hey, learn a band instrument. This saved my life. So, World War I, which was a very bloody conflict, he was in the band, and it literally saved his life. So my grandfather had some musicality, and my grandmother always wandered around the house singing beautiful Italian songs. But, no one was a professional or anything like that. My folks, on the other hand, were great music lovers, and there was always music playing in the house. Do you remember WNEW-AM?
Oh, absolutely. Sure.
Yeah, I'm always bringing this station up to people because as a boy, my parents played that station, and I heard Frank Sinatra and Tony Bennett and Ella Fitzgerald. That's where I first heard Brazilian music that, came to be a great influence in my life and in my playing. I remember hearing Sergio Mendes and the Gets Gilberto records. And they played some top 40 as well, but these guys, NEW-AM, really oriented towards more of the Great American Songbook, jazzy type of music, and that was a wonderful kind of an education to have as a small boy.
Oh, yeah. It sounds like some of that, like my childhood, my father in the car always played that station and then went out and bought the same sort of records. So what got you interested in playing the guitar?
I guess if I had to say one thing got me interested, it was seeing the Beatles. They were on television all the time, and there was just something about it that, wow, I want to do that, And to this day, my mom and I have this argument where I say that she insisted that we had music lessons, and then I insisted on the guitar. And she keeps telling me, no, you always wanted to play the guitar so badly that you asked me for music lessons. So this is an amusing little family disagreement that we have. I can confirm that as a little boy, I had toy guitars all over the place. So around the time I was 8, my mom took me to a local music studio in Brooklyn, and I began to take formal lessons.
8, okay.
Yeah, kind of young to do that, but I was a pretty focused kid. It's funny. I went to a parochial school, so we were used to being told what to do, and you made sure you did it or you got in trouble. So when I started the guitar lessons, and, the teacher said you have to practice every day, I remember my mother sitting me down, and she'd set the timer on the stove. And, I had to practice till that timer went off, and she would, kibitz. So if I was playing and, I hit a wrong note in the beginning, she would, honey, I don't think that was the right note. And then, after a while, you practicing your lesson? And I got to where I could say, sure I am. And I would fake something for her.
That's funny.
And that was the way that I assured her I was practicing for my lesson.
When I was young, besides playing woodwinds, I also played guitar and bass. And what I've found throughout my entire career, when you take a young guitar or bass student, because it's so visual, like the piano, a child's emphasis is more on looking at the fretboard or the keyboard if you're playing piano. If you're playing a woodwind or a brass wind, you can't be looking at your fingers, and so the emphasis is more on the reading and the subdivision. Was that the emphasis or part of the emphasis when you were just beginning guitar lessons?
I would say it was completely the emphasis when I began. I started with those traditional books, like Mel Bay books, and learned to read single notes. And even when my teacher showed me chords, he wrote chord charts, similar to like what a guitarist would see in a big band or any kind of a serious arrangement, those type of chord charts. And so my first, I would say, 2 years of playing was all oriented to reading music. So it's a funny thing. I got away from it at various points and then came back to it. As a teenager, I began to study with, I don't know if you know the name Joe Cinderella. What a wonderful teacher he was.
Oh, sure.
Joe was, you know what I'm talking about. He was a wonderful session musician and taught a lot of the guitarists in North Jersey at that time. And Joe really got me going on reading again after, a hiatus where I hadn't touched it. And then after that, I began to study some classical guitar. So reading, figured in at a lot of different points in my life, although, sometimes I feel like I wish I had had more of an organic ear training type of thing. And I've always emphasized that alongside reading with my own students, because music is, after all, a sonic experience. So you should be able to hear it and be able to play it back. That's equally important to reading.
You're right. Did you play guitar in your school jazz band, let's say in middle school and or high school?
A little bit in high school. And at that time, I didn't find that a very satisfying experience, which isn't the nicest thing I can say. I had a lot of bands that I played in at that time, bands that we would put together, I didn't find the high school jazz band that satisfying. I left high school a year early for college at William Patterson, and then at William Patterson, I played in every ensemble I could talk my way or audition my way into.
Okay.
Also in high school, my high school did an unusual thing, and they put on some musicals. They did Promises, Promises, with the Broadway book, and brought in some ringer union musicians to play the hardest part, like the first trumpet chair and like that.
Sure.
And then they did Oklahoma and Little Abner. And I forget which one now, Oklahoma or Little Abner. I had already, gone off to college, but the music director actually hired me to come back and play in the pit orchestra. That was really fun. So those were the big, more important reading experiences for me in high school, more so than jazz band was.
Occasionally, a guitarist is asked to play banjo or ukulele. Did you ever had a chance to do that?
That's funny that you mentioned that. There was banjo in the guitar book for Oklahoma, if I'm remembering. And I just faked it as best as I could on guitar. And I have, in later years, occasionally fooled around with a little bit of a double, but that has not been my strong suit. That's not the direction I really went in. And I love banjo in particular, great banjo player, Bela Flack. I've got a friend who's now out of Georgia, James McKinney, who played with Vassar Clements and a lot of the big names in bluegrass. And you hear banjo players like that and play with people like that, that's pretty amazing. So I guess the short answer is I haven't done much of that.
My wife and I go to see different bluegrass artists at these festivals, and these banjo players and ukulele players, they play like Paganini. It's unbelievable.
Absolutely, yes. A lot of virtuosity going on there.
Just as a side note, if you ever need to borrow a banjo, my parents bought me a banjo when I was young. Dueling Banjos. You probably remember when that song came out.
Sure.
So they went out and bought a banjo for me, and I'm going, what am I going to do with this thing? But I still have it. So if you want to use it, come on over.
Thank you, Scott. You've always been quite the multi-instrumentalist. So.
Yeah, I forgot to put that on my business card. Sorry. How long did you practice your guitar per day when you began to get serious about music studies?
Well, as a little boy, the teacher used to say you should practice an hour a day. My mother would give me a break and say, okay, I'm going to set the timer for 45 minutes. But then, by the time it was something that I wanted to do, so, think by the time I'm in junior high school now, and, I learned a little bit of rock and roll. I took some lessons with a guy next door who showed me pentatonic scales and 12-bar blues, and now I was playing the guitar morning, noon, and night. It's just what I wanted to do all the time. So, no lack of time spent practicing the guitar.
Excellent. What musical artists were you inspired by then, and are they the same artists that continue to inspire you today?
Well, that's a good question. Again, I would say it started specifically guitar-wise with the Beatles. That's where I really became aware of guitar. And shortly following the Beatles, I had a great affinity for James Taylor. And certainly both of those artists are still big in my mind. I mentioned that I heard Brazilian music when I was very young, my parents playing it on the radio. And that became more and more of an influence to me as I got older. By the time I was in college and studying jazz, I realized that it was the Brazilian jazz that I liked the best. And I could name artist after artist in that style, although not so much, other than João Gilberto, who, kind of wrote the book on bossa nova rhythm guitar. That wasn't so much oriented towards an instrumentalist as much as it was oriented towards, I just loved the rhythm of the music and the beautiful melodies and harmonies that went along with it. Later on I got interested in more specific guitarists, jazz guitarists that meant a lot to me. I always enjoyed Pat Metheny a lot. Ralph Towner is less of a household name. He was the guitarist, I should say, in the band Oregon, which was an offshoot of the Paul Winter Consort. And Ralph Towner was definitely an influence on me because he's one of the first people I ever heard improvising on a classical guitar.
What was the pivotal moment that you knew you were going to do music as a career?
It's funny. I can remember being in the basement of my parents' house, having a rehearsal with some friends, a little band, a garage band or a basement band, if you will. And it suddenly just struck me like a light went off. Like, I love doing this more than anything else. I can't tell you exactly how old I was, somewhere between 12 and 14, I'd guess. And I just knew that's what I want to do that early on, believe it or not.
Yeah, it's great. We all have those little pivotal moments.
Absolutely. And, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, growing up and listening to B.B. King, the first concert I ever saw, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Clapton and Duane Allman and Carlos Santana. Those were the big guys for me as a teenager. And then in the middle of all of this, a friend of mine says, "Hey, this great guitarist is playing in Carnegie Hall. Why don't we ask our dates?" And I'm sorry, it wasn't Carnegie Hall. It was Avery Fisher Hall. Why don't we ask our dates and we'll spend an evening in New York? And that great guitarist was Andre Segovia. And that was a household name when I was a boy. You know, he was the maestro of the classical guitar, the guy who brought the classical guitar back to the concert stage.
Yes.
And we went to see him, and that was mind-boggling. That set me down the road of going back to the acoustic guitar, of studying classical guitar, all of which became a great influence on the rest of my career.
You can't go wrong with a Segovia, right? I mean, that's...
You know, he was so, magnificent, and still is, although there's, I occasionally hear some, a negative talk about him, but it's sort of like the people who talk about Freud negatively. Oh, Freud didn't really understand this, that, and the other. Yeah, but before Freud started talking about psychology, the concept wasn't there. And that was kind of the thing with Segovia. Before he brought the classical guitar back to the concert stage, the idea of classical guitar had completely disappeared.
It's almost like in the saxophone world. Saxophone was originally used in the military, and then as a novelty, and then they try to break it into the classical world, and people are going, "What are you, nuts? We don't do that here in classical." And it took years and years and years to for the saxophone to be respected as a classical instrument, which is not widely known. It's more widely known for contemporary and jazz and stuff like that. But I certainly understand that.
Yeah. Well, similar things, right? The instruments that were not as respected. And it's funny when you think about the popularity of both of these instruments, of saxophone and guitar. So, they obviously have something that captures the listener.
Absolutely, I agree. So when you were at William Patterson, did you have any professors that were just great mentors, anything like that? And did you get 1 degree there or 2 degrees?
I hate to admit it, I never finished my degree at William Patterson. And yes, I had a lot of teachers who were great mentors and great influences, all of them really. And, with other people that I knew from William Patterson, Sue Williams was there with me, and Bud Malton, are musicians that I still see regularly, Charlie Descarfino. We all attended William Patterson roughly around the same time, and those are people I see today. And one thing we all say is we didn't realize how good we had it then, how great the teachers were. Don Fernuto was he taught music theory, and he taught ear training. When I left school, I continued to study privately with him. He was a Juilliard-trained doctorate in music, and the man was brilliant. And I liked him because besides, being Juilliard trained and obviously this classical side, he had put himself through college playing jazz piano. So, I made a connection with him right away. So many great teachers there. I had the pleasure to study with the late, great Harry Leahy for a semester or two while I was there, who's a name that everybody doesn't know. Harry, his claim to fame was he's on a Phil Woods album, and Harry played a lot with the great saxophonist Eric Kloss, but he was a musical genius, and everyone who studied with him, still keeps his name alive.
When I was a kid, I remember that name. I used to hear that name quite often because friends of mine that were serious guitarists all studied with him. So he was part of the inner circle.
Absolutely. Yeah. Other great teachers at the time I was at William Patterson, Dr. Jeff Kresge, another guy with a doctorate in music, and his master's was in English. So he was one of the most erudite professors I ever had. He spoke beautifully and had a very literary sense of music in the way he described it. I also studied with Dr. Kresge after I left school privately for a time. wonderful, wonderful teacher. And I'm sure, I would leave a lot of people off. There were so many great people. We recently mourned the death of Gary Fitzpatrick, who was the pianist in residence there. And I can remember, at William Patterson, every Thursday afternoon, there was a concert series, and it ranged. Sometimes there would be jazz concerts, often there would be classical concerts. And when a guest artist came, whether it was an instrumentalist or a vocalist in the classical world, Gary Fitzpatrick would be their accompanist. And I remember being astonished because you would see that he was reading the pieces, and it was happening so often that you said, oh my God, how much could he possibly have prepared for each of these? They're happening so frequently. And he was such a magnificent reader, accompanist, and just pianist in general. Hearing his accompaniments were making the concerts a wonderful thing. Thad Jones and Mel Lewis were there, and I had the pleasure of having classes with them. Another great teacher I'd be remiss in leaving out is the wonderful saxophonist Bobby Keller. I don't know if you know Bobby. In later years...
Oh, sure, I knew Bobby.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yep.
In later years, we would meet on the gig trail occasionally, and recently we've been in touch. So, it was great bunch of teachers there in those days at William Patterson, and I understand still today.
Let me talk a little bit about your guitar arrangements. So I look at your YouTube, I've listened to you, I've stood next to you for years listening to you play. So I know your guitar arrangements, and they're just absolutely fantastic. So I've got to ask you, you memorize all this because I've never seen you read anything of what you're playing. So are they written down and then you've memorized them, or do you change them every time?
Okay, well, a couple of questions there. Generally, these kind of solo guitar pieces, whether it's a fingerstyle arrangement that I invent or learn from someone else, or if it's a classical piece, you won't see me reading them because I have to practice them and get them under my fingers well enough to be way beyond reading them. I learned years ago that when you memorized it, you were able to play it better. Many of my own arrangements I've never written down, but rather I conceive them from a song that I know. So in other words, I might know the tune and the changes to a piece. And then I say, well, what could I do with this? Could I develop a bass line? Could I, put this into a Latin rhythm, and how would I deal with it? And I do that mostly without writing anything down. Now, occasionally, because I do some extremely contrapuntal things in these arrangements, like when I play Day Tripper, there were times when I was working that up that I sat down and wrote out a couple of measures of the piece as though I were writing out a classical guitar arrangement in order to get the syncopation and the counterpoint to happen. But it would be pretty rare for me to write the whole piece out. I have written a couple of pieces out, and this is something that I want to get involved in because there is interest from other guitarists in learning arrangements. And generally the arrangements are written out in music and in tablature, which is not my favorite thing. I don't think that's necessarily the best way to learn, but it's very, very popular. And so this is something I have on my docket to do, is to get some of these arrangements written down. But most of them I work up on my own, and then you say, are they the same? Well, generally what happens is if I come up with what I think is a good idea for how the piece should flow, in other words, what the arrangement is going to be, if that's a walking bass against a melody, or, there's usually some musical idea that's propelling the piece, then the basic head of the piece will be kind of fixed. But because it's what I do, and because of my background playing jazz, I usually then will go off and improvise on the piece, generally I do it, in the jazz style of keeping the form together and staying in the harmony of the tune. But at that point, I will improvise. I remember Joe Pass, who had those albums in the 70s, Virtuoso, and then it became a series. There was Virtuoso 2 and so on. And he played alone, so he had this beautiful concept on the guitar for chord melody, but then he would improvise. And, if you tapped your foot or kept your place with him, he was staying with the tune completely as he went through his improvisation. And I try to do the same thing.
I remember those albums, absolutely.
Yeah, really great stuff. So, there is an improvised part to what I do in most of the pieces, not all of them. Some of the pieces, I play them, as an arrangement, and that's that. But I would say that probably 85% of the time, I do go off into improvised sections.
Can you share with my listeners about your experience of being a fingerstyle guitar champion?
Well, that's been a very gratifying part of the last couple of decades for me. One day I saw an article in Acoustic Guitar magazine, and it said the winning arrangement for the National Fingerpicking Championship. And I picked up the magazine, and it was an arrangement of Linus and Lucy from the Peanuts show. And I had my own arrangement of Linus and Lucy that I had just recorded a year or two before that. And when I looked at this, it looked like it was a very similar arrangement to mine. And I said, well, if this person's a national finger-picking champion, why can't I be? So I found out about the festival where this takes place, which is the Walnut Valley Festival in Winfield, Kansas. And by the way, this is the same place where when you hear, for example, that Alison Krauss was a national fiddle champ or that Bela Fleck was a national banjo champ, this is the same festival where all of those contests are taking place. So in 2000, I traveled out to Kansas and competed. And it was a wonderful experience. I met a lot of great musicians out there. And I discovered that this festival was a lot more than just the contests, and it has besides that there are wonderful shows going on for the 4 official days of the festival. There's also a community of people camped out, as many as 15,000 people, with acoustic jam sessions going on night and day. And I met a lot of wonderful musicians who I still go to see every year, and we jam together. But I continue going and competing in the Fingerstyle Championship. And I had a lot of encouragement and support from everyone who heard me, but I was not going anywhere in the contest. So it was funny. But the 8th time I tried, and I was very offhanded that time because I didn't know whether I was going to make the festival that year. It was a last-minute decision. And I hadn't specially prepared pieces. And by that time, I thought, well, I'm too jazzy, and they don't like nylon string guitars. And so I competed, sort of on a whim, and I played pieces that I knew pretty well, and that was the year that I won. So I guess, there's a lesson in being relaxed and not having too much hanging in the balance. That's how I became a fingerstyle champion, which has been a lot of fun. It's been a great honor. I've done some judging, like I was just down in Indiana for the Indiana State String Fest, and they have a fingerstyle competition there. I was there judging that and then performing in their concert. So, a lot of honors with this. But I keep telling the competitors, hey, remember, music is not a competitive sport. Do this because it's fun and because there's you get a lot of camaraderie with the other guitarists. And especially when you're doing something like fingerstyle guitar that you do alone, it's really nice then to come together with other musicians and, have that feeling.
It's a much smaller world. Would you say that? much smaller than, let's say, the electric guitar world.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Although it's been growing. It's been growing a lot. When I started doing it, when I started playing these arrangements, I only knew of two or three guitarists. There was Leo Kottke, and there was Michael Hedges, and Tuck Andrus. And now there's lots of fingerstyle guitarists that are out there. Tommy Emmanuel has made a lot of noise, and I think has more fame than any of the people that I described before. And you hear more and more, especially if you're a YouTube person, there are people coming down the pike all the time doing these solo acoustic guitar arrangements. So it definitely much smaller than the electric guitar world, which is gigantic. But it's a growing world. And the other interesting thing that I see about this is that a lot of classical guitarists cross over into fingerstyle guitar, which is kind of a natural progression, if you will.
Can you talk about the guitar that you played at that festival? Is it the same one that you play today?
Yes. As a matter of fact, it is. That's a Spanish-made instrument. It's a Pedro de Miguel. They're a small luthier in Madrid. It was two guys, Pedro and Miguel, that worked in the Ramirez factory. Ramirez was the very, very famous Spanish classical guitar company. At one point, Segovia played a Ramirez, and so did George Harrison. These guys went on their own, and I was fortunate enough to find this guitar in New York, it was a very strange tale. Someone sent me to a shop in the village. Evidently, the guy who owned this guitar must have used it as collateral on a loan, and I went to a closed shop in the village and found the guitar, but the strings on it were so god-awful, I couldn't get any idea. But, I knew that this was a good luthier, so I asked him if he'd put strings on it, and I came back. And that's how I found the guitar. Very, sort of a cloak and dagger thing. I go into the village, knock on a door, I get led into a shop with tables everywhere, stacked with junk, but I can't see what the junk is because there are sheets on top of everything. And this woman who had possession of the guitar, who is not the owner, as I understood, because I was in touch with the owner. That's who I spoke to on the phone. And so I kind of lucked into this guitar. It's a great instrument. And sadly, one of the luthiers, I'm remiss that I don't remember the name, but one of the luthiers passed of a heart attack a couple of years ago. So I guess this is somewhat of a more rare instrument because of that. I'm not sure if the shop is still operating because of that.
That's a great story. I know you've worked with iconic artists that include Les Paul and Larry Coryell and Herbie Hancock. I mean, that's quite a list. What was that like? And the feeling of locking in with them on stage?
Wow. Well, I can tell you Les Paul was a lot of fun. What a generous, what a funny guy. And Les was sort of a neighbor of mine. I used to kid with him that if I took the canoe, it was only a mile from my house to his house. Les had a tradition of bringing guests onto the bandstand, which is something that I try to do a lot myself. Unfortunately, in the years that I was doing this with Les, he wasn't playing much. So, he was on stage, he'd play a couple of numbers. He basically was acting more as an MC and a comedian. So I more played with his band. He featured me playing with his band, which was a great honor. And I'm very grateful to him for having done that. What an iconic figure Les Paul was. Larry Coryell I met on a tour for Dr. L. Subramaniam. Subramaniam is widely considered the greatest South Indian violinist. That's the Carnatic style of Indian music, which is, it's an Indian tradition that has a tremendous amount of improvising in it. And he's an international star. He's written pieces that he's played with orchestras all over the world. Subramaniam often toured with a group of American jazz musicians that I was a part of. I've toured and recorded with him. And the last trip I took with him to India, this was in the 90s, Coryell was also part of that tour. And wow, what an experience to be next to a guitarist like Larry Coryell, who was also a very encouraging and positive energy. And, you know, some of these musicians, you don't get the full measure of their depth, their greatness until you're on the bandstand next to them. And then it's a sensation as much as it is a sound. And I definitely put Larry Coryell into that category. He was really something, and it's very sad that we lost him so early on. I was backstage at the Iridium when Larry was filling in for Les Paul. He had invited me to sit in with him. And at the end of a jazz standard, Larry starts a kind of a solo obligato that becomes his solo arrangement of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring.
Oh, my God.
It was absolutely stunning. I sat backstage shaking my head. I said, I can't believe I'm going to come out and play after this. He was really something.
Wow. Well, when I was a teenager, I also had Larry Coryell records, and you tell your friends about it that are, you know, not in that world. They're like, who? Who's that? The other thing I want to touch upon, you mentioned Les Paul, of course, you know, what a great innovator of the guitar. You mentioned that he had it was kind of comedic. He had a great sense of humor. Do you incorporate humor in your performances or in your music life?
I hope so. You know, and it's going to be up to the audience to decide. But yes, I like to take things light. I like to, even sometimes in the arrangements, you know, like that arrangement of Linus and Lucy that I mentioned, you know. I mean, it's kind of a funny piece. I used to play also like the theme of the Flintstones all the time. I think there has to be some humor in what you play and the way you play, but also, you know, I like to create an atmosphere that's fun for the audience and for the other musicians. Because if we're not having fun doing this, you know, something's wrong. What are we doing? I don't want to take myself too seriously.
That's right. So could you share a few stories, like funny stories or anything interesting about the music business or musicians?
Oh, boy. You're putting me on the spot here, Scott.
Just one.
Yeah, there's a lot of funny stories about musicians. Wow. Let me see if I can narrow this down a little bit. Well, you know, I had a really silly, funny experience where I was playing in a wedding band, and it was time to sing the first dance. And I turned to the singer. You know, we had a singer with us that night. I said, "Have you got How Sweet It Is?" And he says, "Yeah, key of C." I said, How Sweet It Is a funny song because it's usually done in the key of G, but the first chord is C.
Right.
I said, "You mean first chord is C?" He says, No, I know my keys in the key of C. I said, "Okay." And then I made an announcement that the bride and groom were going to dance, and I started on the guitar. I started the introduction to the song, and the band starts, and I turned to where the singer was just a moment ago when I had this conversation, and he's not there. And I see one of the other musicians with an expression on her face, and I'm watching her eyes, and I turn around and look where she's looking. And here's this musician walking across the dance floor, which is now lit up by video camera lights, and he's on the cell phone. You know, and I think, oh, my God, you know. Well, fortunately, I know the song, so I turn to the band. I go, "Let's go back to the key of G." We go back to the key of G, and I start to sing the song. Well, about halfway into the song, the singer comes sprinting back across the band floor, across the lighted thing, grabs the microphone, and in mid-phrase picks up the singing and starts to sing. And I'm looking at this guy and shaking my head like, what the heck are you on about? And in between phrases, he has the nerve to come off the microphone and say this is the wrong key.
A real pro, huh?
You know, it turned out later that he was on the phone with AAA because he had a flat and he was trying to get them to fix his flat. But, you know, what a crazy bunch of things to happen on the bandstand all at one time.
Well, funny enough, that's how I met you. You might remember that. It was with a Club Date orchestra that you and I were both working with. And
That's right.
And I think you were subbing for my guitarist for whatever reason. I think his wife was having a baby or whatever. And they said, oh, this great guitarist, vocalist, Mark Sganga, he's going to fill in. And just like you said, okay, does this guy know the repertoire? Can he sing this? Can he play this? And you came in and, you know, right away with your confidence, I just knew, you know, you're just going to fit in, you know, 1, 2, 3. And if anyone doesn't really know what a club date is, that's a term for when you are in a wedding band, you play a bar mitzvah, a corporate party. And I know Mark can, you know, back me up on this. Back then, you would not have a song list of what you're going to do, unlike bands today. So as a leader, you would turn around to the guys and you would motion with your fingers up. So any of the fingers that are up in New Jersey, that's a New Jersey rule, they're in flats.
Right.
If the fingers are down, that's in sharp. Okay, so if I held 2 fingers up, we're in B flat. If I then cross my fingers, that's B flat minor. This was invented long before you and I were born.
Absolutely right.
But if you go to Philadelphia or New York, it's the opposite. So if you're working in those states and you give the sign and you start playing in the wrong key, they're like, "What are you doing?" Oh,
right.
Or I'm in the wrong territory. So I remember I just turned around to you. You don't name the song. I just give the key. I give, okay, Foxtrot 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. You start right in, you know, 1, 6, 2, 5, turn around, whatever. And okay, everyone in the club date field should know the song within the next, the very first 2 or 3 notes. And I knew right away. And then if the piano player is using these substitute chords, you're right there. And I'm going, it's going to be a great night. So that's how we met. And I said, oh, man, I know I'm going to love working with this guy. And then I turned to you and say, can you sing a couple? Sure. What genre? And any genre. You did it. So, you know, that was a great moment.
We had quite an education doing that, didn't we?
Oh, my God.
You know, I feel like I have to mention, have you heard about that movie, Club Date Stories?
Well, I haven't heard about the movie, but I remember this was started years ago. If we're talking about the same thing, please let me know if this is correct. There's one musician. I don't have permission to use his name now because we haven't talked about it. And he was going around to every club date leader like myself or you or sideman and saying, hey, do you have any funny club date stories?
Right.
Is this what you're talking about?
That's what I'm talking about. You know, he finished the movie. This was a guy I worked with a lot in those days. And I understand that you can find it. The movie is on YouTube, Club Date Stories. And he's just interviewing people, you know, with these kind of stories. But, you know, he's a filmmaker, so he edited it well, and it's really quite something. And, you know, if you're a musician in New York, you've done this. You've played, you know, like this. I've played with some of the best musicians in the world on these club dates. I've met all the guys from the television shows. I remember one time going on a date in New York, a club date. It was a small big band, and the lead trumpet player turned around and said, "Hi, Marvin Stamm." Now, I'm sure you know that name. I almost fell over. You know, he was on most of the records that I loved. And here he was sitting in front of me playing on this date. It was a great equalizer because the money was good and you didn't have to rehearse. So if you were available at the last minute, you could just, you know, come and fit into the gig. And it made the musicians in New York better, faster ear players than anywhere else.
Exactly.
Because this tradition is really, when I say New York, you know, I mean the New York, New Jersey area. It made us, it gave us a skill set that no one else had, because you didn't need that skill set anywhere else.
Exactly. And when I tell people, I remember breaking into that field and like you and I working for, one of the biggest club date offices in the New York, New Jersey area, they would say, okay, these are the standards that you have to learn in these keys. And I remember taking an entire summer practicing and trying to memorize like 500 songs. And when I tell people that, they're saying, you're full of it. I said, no, you don't understand. This is serious stuff.
Yep.
And so to piggyback on what you said about the movie, which I got to check out, there's one of the stories that I went through. I would love to tell you right now, but I'll tell you after the show is over. But in any event, I'm sitting down there serving us, horrible sandwiches with, leftover toothpicks in them. And so, the stories are flying. And this one guy came in from Florida. And he said, hey, you guys got any stories about, club date bands or musicians? And we're sitting there, we're throwing the stories back and forth. And he says, man, I just heard this story last week when I was in Tampa. He said there was a band leader that blah, 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 blah. And I started to turn white. I says, oh my God, that was me.
Wow.
You. And by, the way he told the story, it was like half true. So I had to tell him the real, the way it went.
Right.
He says, oh, okay. And I'm going, Florida. It got all the way to Florida? Says, oh, yeah. That story and a story about this, a story about that. And I'm telling all these other stories. Oh, yeah, I heard that one. Yeah, I heard that one. And then they were telling us stories. Yeah, I heard that one from you. It's pretty wild.
Wow. The musical grapevine.
Yes, right. So speaking of gigs, what's your favorite type of gig to play?
You know what? My favorite type of gig to play is any gig where people are paying attention to and enjoying the music. And I've had that happen, in concerts. I've had that happen in restaurants. I've had it happen in clubs. I've had it happen at house parties. It's just about that magical moment when people tune in and you feel that connection that you're playing. So, I won't say, oh, I love to play a concert or I love to play a trio gig. I mean, I love all of those things, but it's about connection with people. I do love to play trio gigs. I love to play with other musicians and have unexpected things happen. But it makes me happy anytime I'm playing and I feel like people are appreciating it. After all, how lucky are we? We spend our lives creating a beautiful thing, which is music. And if we feel like people are hearing it and appreciating it, then we're doubly blessed.
I agree. I'm right there with you. So what was the defining moment you knew you were really good at your craft, thus achieving your chops?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story. In 2000, I visited Brazil for the first time. One of my best friends that I've traveled around the world with said, hey, I've got a business contact in Brazil and I have an invitation. My wife doesn't want to go. Are you interested in going to Brazil? Absolutely, I'm interested in going to Brazil. We had a wonderful trip. We went to Carnival, and I made a great friend in Rio who I'm still in touch with. But anyway, while we were there, we went to a great jazz club in Rio. It was called Mistura Fina. I understand they closed some time ago now. And there was a trio of Brazilian guys playing jazz, and I was introduced to them, and we knew a couple of musicians in common, and they said, hey, man, why don't you come back and sit in? I said, well, careful what you ask for. And a night or two later, we came back, and I brought my guitar. And these guys did a funny thing, where they called a couple of difficult, fast songs to see if I could keep up with them. And as soon as I did, they were relaxed and happy, and I played a whole set with these guys, including a lot of Brazilian tunes that I love, and I was especially thrilled because, getting to do this with Brazilians. At the end of the set, when we took a break, people in the audience came up to me and started gushing to me in Portuguese. And I had to say, I'm sorry, do you have any English? At that time, I didn't speak any Portuguese. And they were like, you're not Brazilian? Which was the greatest validation that I was playing Brazilian music authentically. And, just a wonderful moment, a wonderful experience, which, by the way, set me on the path of learning to speak some Portuguese and learning to sing many of these great Brazilian classics in Portuguese.
And to let my listeners know, you're absolutely brilliant at it. I mean, you're not just like, okay, phonetically you say it like this. No, you're the real deal. And I said, wow, that's fantastic. So, and the passion comes out. Like I said before, when you do this stuff, you can see you're very passionate about it. So let me ask you, what do you wish you had known when you first started out in the music business?
Wow. That's a big one. Wow. You just shut me up, and that's hard to do, Scott. Well, there's kind of a lot of things that I wish I knew, but in a way, I think the biggest thing is that you should seek your bliss. If you're happy and you're playing music that you love, everything is going to work. And that's the most important thing, is finding, what it is that you love and just pursuing that, as opposed to, being political or following trends or any of that stuff. It's just all about, if you're happy and you can present that happiness in what you play, then I think you're going to get over, and people are going to love what you're doing.
Mark has that ability to go from fingerstyle, classical guitar, he'll pick up his electric and just do some burning solos. And I was very fortunate to have him on my album a number of years ago called The Color of Midnight, and of which you could hear him at the top of my show, my intro and my outro. That's him playing. And the other thing that I loved about having Mark in the studio, whatever music you put in front of him, he sight reads his butt off. He knows how to do it. And he likes any type of music. And he digs right in. And if you ask him, hey, can you inflect it this way, inflect it that way? There were a couple things that I did on my album that I was so impressed with you when I said to you, listen, I'm looking for this double guitar and saxophone lead like Tom Scott would do with Robin Ford. You knew exactly what I was looking for. We played together. Pitch was right there, banging the notes. And you could see on your face like you were, really into it. And I said, and the performance was just absolutely great. So I can't thank you enough for those tracks that you played on.
Oh, Scott, I had a ball playing on your album. Great tunes, and you're a wonderful arranger and producer. You knew exactly what you wanted, and you were able to express it in a musical and understandable way. So that was a really fun thing doing that with you. I'm honored to be a part of that.
And you and I were just so blessed to be at the same studio where Stevie Wonder, Freda Payne, Gladys Knight all recorded, because that was Tony Camilo's studio in Hillsborough, New Jersey. Tony passed away a few years ago, 90 years old, and Tony was one of the great writers and arrangers in Motown in the early days with Holland Dozier Holland. He was one of those guys.
Right, lots of great credit.
To this day, I miss him dearly. He was just one of the best people in the world for me. What a mentor.
Absolutely.
What advice could you share with someone that's listening to you right now that's probably inspired by you? I'm sure they are, dreaming or thinking about doing the same things as you?
Wow. This is an interesting thing, and I use a quote that I first saw in an interview with Mike Stern, the great guitarist who played with Miles when Miles came out of retirement. They asked Mike the same question, and he said, look, if you want to play music, forget about it. He said, if you must play music because it's, in your bones and nothing else will do, okay, now we have a place to start talking from. And I will say that. You have to be, in order to pursue music as a career, you have to be so committed to it. It has to be something that you want more than anything else, because the nature of the beast is that there's a great deal of sacrifice that goes into it. Mm-hmm. And I don't say that to discourage people, and I've been a music educator my whole life, and I'm still doing that with private students, and I'm an adjunct faculty member at Ramapo College here in New Jersey. I love to encourage people who want to pursue this, but this is not like, well, maybe I'll go into, maybe I'll get a business degree and go into marketing, or maybe I'll, get an English degree and become an English teacher. It's not that sort of a career. There can't be a maybe about it. It's so challenging in so many different ways, in the competitiveness of it, in the demands of it, in the sacrifices that you'll make because it's a difficult business, that, you have to know it's really what you want to do, and you have to have that kind of commitment. And that's the only way I think that anyone will be happy with a career in music.
Do you have any music events or new projects that are coming up that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Well, sure. I have some steady gigs that I'm doing. I play every Wednesday night at the Old 76 House, which is America's oldest running tavern. It's in Tappan, New York, which is right below Nyack, just over the border from New Jersey. It's a great restaurant. It's a very historical place. And I'm there from 6:30 to 9:30 every Wednesday, often with a group. Sometimes solo, but it's always a fun experience, musically. We don't always know what it will be. I also play as a soloist on Thursdays, more down into your neck of the woods in East Windsor, New Jersey. There's a wonderful restaurant called the Americana Kitchen and Bar.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
The place for really good food there. Very well-run restaurant. In East Windsor, Americana Kitchen and Bar. Every Thursday I'm there from 6 to 9. So those are regular. Otherwise, I encourage people to like Mark Sganga Music on Facebook, and or drop me an email on my website, marksganga.com, and I can put you on my email list, because as concerts and things come up, we look forward to, inviting our friends and having a lot of fun together.
My wife Elizabeth says to say hi.
Oh, send her my love.
And she wanted me to remind everyone that Mark did a phenomenal job at our wedding reception. We're coming up on 10 years. Can you believe it? 10 years. It goes by so quick. And, we had a small little room that we rented in one of in the area at a beautiful, great Italian place, and you just filled up that room with your vocals and your guitar, and everyone still raves about it. Who was that guy? So I'm sure when they listen to this, oh yeah, that was at Scott and Liz's wedding. So you're still being talked about.
That's wonderful to hear, Scott. I remember the event, and it was an honor to be there.
Well, thank you. Mark, I can't thank you enough. I had such a great time interviewing you, introducing you to listeners of mine that might not know who you are. People in the industry obviously know who you are and respect you and, love to play with you. And I miss playing with you. It's been some time, and I hope there's an opportunity where we can get together in the future again to do that.
Absolutely. Let's make that happen.
Thank you once again, Mark, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Scott. Peace and love to you and all the listeners out there. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much for joining me on today's show. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and could hear why my guest got chops. Please spread the word to your family and friends about my podcast, and if you would like to discuss Got Chops in between episodes, you can reach me on Instagram at Got Chops Podcast and on Twitter at Grimaldi Music. I can also be reached on Facebook, Scott Grimaldi, The Color of Midnight. My website is grimaldimusic.com, and the address for this podcast is anchor.fm/gotchops. Before I conclude with today's show, I'd like to share a catchphrase of mine that you'll probably hear me say quite often, for I truly believe it sums up what every artist has in common in order to achieve their chops. And it goes like this: it's not my way, it's the way it is. Join me on the next episode when we discover why my next guest got chops.